MINDBEND, non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for MINDBEND Creative.
Cristianna Hougland of Mushee Medicinal. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mushee Medicinal. Where did you come up with the concept for Mushee Medicinal?
It's a little bit of a loaded question.
Yeah.
There's a long journey, but the short answer for that is I recognized that there really wasn't a brand that was really giving quality ingredients to the public. And everything is alcohol based, as far as like tinctures, or it's either in a powder or a pill. And, I personally like tinctures myself. I think they're more absorbable in the body. Your gut doesn't have to process all of that when you lose all of the like bioavailability products that you're ingesting. So I was like, hey, there's an opportunity in this like niche market. Let me create a non-alcoholic tincture. And so I created this formulation using organic vegetable glycerin that is non-palm derived because we're eco-friendly. We don't want to attribute to the deforestation of all of our forests. So it's soy derived with reverse osmosis water, and then really high quality mushroom resin extracts. So I created the company and bringing it out into the world for really like the sober community. I noticed there was also like a gap in the market. The non-alcoholic beverage space is like really blowing up right now. And so I really love that, how people are shying away from like alcohol in their diet constantly. There's nothing wrong with alcohol, but I think there's definitely a part in our society where we really need to limit the use of alcohol in our diet, because it does, it brings down our energetic field. And so really catering to the sober community so they also can have something that they can ingest that's not a pill or a powder.
If you're not familiar with the concept of a tincture, when you think of, what does tincture mean to you?
Yeah, tincture is just like a liquid extract. There's multiple different ways that you can create a tincture. You can take just 90 proof alcohol, put your herbs or your adaptogens in this jar. You let it sit for about a month or two, and the alcohol basically dissolves all of the fibrous parts of the plant or the adaptogen, whatever
You're making a tincture of.
It gets rid of all the fibers and the parts of the product that your body can't process. And so you're left with all of the medicinal properties of that herb or product. And then you strain out the fibrous stuff, and you're just left with this like kind of like medicinal solution or liquid. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is doing like a dual extraction. We're doing the first process that I just mentioned, and then the second process is you're boiling that fibrous product at a high temperature, and you're releasing some more of the medicinal properties that were left over. So now you're combining the water and the alcohol extract together. So
the boiling process is just water.
Just water. Now you're combining both of those products together to create a dual extraction. So you have a little bit more of the medicinal properties in it, a little bit stronger a ratio of that extract in there. The process that we utilize, we use a machine that basically vibrates the medicinal properties of that product within like 30 seconds to a minute. It basically explodes the cell membrane, so we're able to extract that product. You can do it in any type of solvent. You can do water, you can do alcohol, you can do honey, oil, any type of thing. Typically water, something that's less viscous, more liquidy, you'll have a better outcome. You'll be able to extract more of that medicinal property. So we utilize cold water for that extraction. Explodes the cell membrane. Then we take that product, the fibrous parts of it. And then we put it into another machine where it basically puts into a really sticky resin solution. And then you're left with this like little blob of resin from mushrooms. And so there's no heat involved in it. There's slight heat in the second portion of it, but it's not extreme heat like the boiling of the water of the dual extraction. So you're able to leave most of the medicinal properties within that. And that's how we get our mushroom resins. And then we put it into our formulation, and it's completely water soluble. So it dissolves right into the water, the reverse osmosis water that we're utilizing, and then the vegetable glycerin.
Glycerin is taking the place of alcohol
It
in
is.
the extraction or distillation process.
It is, yeah. And I love vegetable glycerin because it's naturally sweet. It's a form of sugar alcohol. That's why it's naturally sweet, but it's basically you take the oils, and how you make glycerin is you take the oil or any type of oil that you're utilizing, you extract the glycerites from that oil, and then you're left with this like kind of sticky honey-like substance after, and that's where the glycerin comes from. It's from these certain oils.
Do you have a science background?
I do not. This is just all, it's funny. It all comes from the field and researching and just really tuning into my remembrance of the collective consciousness, right? So it's funny, like I love talking about this stuff because
Sure.
there's so much that we already know, but we sell ourselves short, right? And so like when something feels true to you, you're like, okay, yeah, like I do know how to do this, right? And so for me, like researching, I'm like, oh, like why did I think of this? Have I done this before? Or is this something that I'm taking from the collective consciousness and I'm like harnessing and utilizing it to remember?
It's not fair to hit you right off the bat with where does Mushee Medicinal come from? and I don't expect an answer in so much as it's just getting the conversation started.
Yeah.
But I saw you speak at the Awakening of Consciousness conference this past summer here in Los Angeles. And one of the things that really piqued my interest was that you were coming from it with you were coming at the topic with an emphasis on the idea of sobriety and a focus on the mushroom being accessible to everyone to receive the holistic and medicinal benefits without having a psychedelic experience necessarily.
Yeah.
Now, a psychedelic experience potentially in the way that we tend to think of when we hear that term.
For
right?
sure.
Because growth and transformation and different states of consciousness can be achieved. And I would imagine it could be argued that, learning and evolving and growth and transformation can be psychedelic. But changing consciousness in a different way that isn't the traditional psychedelic way, right? So, as mushrooms, the idea of mushrooms become more and more popular, as people become more aware, a product like yours can influence people and introduce people to benefits that they might not normally have explored. And you have to create a sort of safe and disarming and accessible platform to do that. You've created a business. So if your background's not necessarily science, was it business or talk to me about what it takes to actually launch an enterprise, like introducing a very specialized product to as many people as possible.
Yeah. So my background is, I didn't go to college. I have always had this like entrepreneurial spirit from a young age, seeing my dad, my dad had a jet aviation company. He had a solar company. He had an investment company. And I just saw all the things that he was doing as like what an entrepreneur does, right? You do one thing and you fail at it and you try again, and you do it again, right? And so I saw that at a young age, that drive that he had. And it just really inspired me to also be the same. And I think there's something to say about working for yourself is so liberating and it's so freeing. The traditional 9 to 5, some people love it. They love the consistency of like knowing exactly what I'm going to get. I know like what my budget is. I know all that, but I'm a little bit crazier than that. I like the ups and downs of life. And I was listening to one of Aubrey Marcus's podcasts, and someone on his Arcadia little like a snippet that he like put on his podcast said that, we came here to earth to feel, and we can't forget that. And so that really resonated with me. I'm like, wow, that is exactly why I love being an entrepreneur, because I'm feeling everything that life has to offer, all of the ups and downs. And so my background basically is working since I was the age of 12. I was a babysitter. I hustled and I sold lemonade at the street corner, selling toys and stuff, or selling clothes. At one point, I was making clothes and selling them when I was younger. And then when I left the house at 18, I worked at a large retail department store for about 3 or 4 years. And I quickly like rose the ranks to that. At like a 18, 19-year-old girl, I was like a manager for 40 and 50-year-olds. And I shortly realized I was like, retail is just not my thing. It's exhausting, and I feel for those people so much. I mean, that is a hard job to be constantly in that customer service aspect. And then I became a mortgage officer at one point in my life, and then I was like, that's not for me either. And then I found this multi-level marketing company, and that completely changed my life. And it was the first time I ever had personal development in my life. And I was 20 years old. And I remember I was listening to Jim Rohn just speaking and talking about life and entrepreneurship and personal development. And my first personal development book I ever read was called The Slight Edge, and about the compounding interest over time of the little things that you do every single day gets you exactly to where you want to be. And that's the difference between people who succeed and don't succeed, right? And so that really resonated with me. So after that, I was like, okay, I'm going to get out of like this like kind of like corporate 9 to 5 retail world. And at the time, the MLM company was it was like a skincare company. So I really love beauty and fashion and all of that. And so I started working in spas, aesthetic spas. And so my first job was growing this like portion of the aesthetic business. And I grew it from nothing to about $600,000 in 6 months. And I was like, wow, like I'm really good at this. So I kind of, I grew from there, and I was like, okay, like I can grow businesses. So I went to another spa, and they did about 500,000 per year. And by the end of the 4.5, almost 5 years I was there, we ended up doing almost like $2.5-3 million per year. And then I surely realized I want to work for myself. I'm helping somebody else build their dream 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week when I can be pouring that into myself. And so that's kind of my background and my drive of like, why I wanted to build Mushee. I'm really passionate about mushrooms. I was a vegan for 10 years of my life. And so mushrooms have always been like a part of like my diet and meat.
Okay.
I recently, literally within the last 3 weeks, I'm no longer a vegan.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But mushrooms have always been like a staple of my diet, the culinary mushrooms. And then I had my first psychedelic awakening with a microdose. And,
Of psilocybin?
Of psilocybin, yeah. And that really just opened up my world. I'm like, wow, this tiny, tiny little pill really just expanded my mind so much that it was like changed my life forever. I never looked back after that. And so I got into the psilocybin space as well, owning a psychedelic company, and then getting into functional mushrooms because I love the way that functional mushrooms make you feel energetically in your body, and how that kind of is like a gateway. Mushroom, like functional mushrooms, is kind of like a gateway into the psychedelic space. And I know like sometimes we think about gateway as kind of like a negative connotation, but I think it's a beautiful, like it's a bridge into the oasis, right, of your mind. And it was just like a really beautiful synergy moment for to bring, psilocybin and then have like a bridge for people to walk through to functional mushrooms or the other way.
Why is it? Thank you for all that.
Yeah.
Why is a traditional culinary mushroom? How is it different from a functional mushroom, the type of which you're working with now, that have maybe an increased magic capacity to them? Where does that? I mean, I know mushrooms aren't the same across the board,
Right.
but how do they differ, and how are they the same? Because I feel like with the documentaries like Fantastic Fungi and just people learning more about incorporating them into their wellness routine or their diets. Can you tell us about like the
Sure.
difference between culinary mushrooms and functional mushrooms? How they get to be so different and how they're the same?
Yeah, absolutely. So culinary mushrooms, obviously, we can ingest them better into our gut. Some of the medicinal ones, our bodies can't really process them in our gut, so that's why we utilize an extraction in order to be able to process them.
Okay, so like if you had a chaga mushroom versus whatever you get at the grocery
A
store,
portobello mushroom.
a portobello
right.
mushroom.
Yeah.
If you ate the chaga mushroom just whole, we would have gastrointestinal
Oh
issues.
yeah, absolutely. And also with culinary mushrooms, there are beta glucans and polysaccharides, whereas the medicinal ones, they have a higher capacity or intake of beta glucans and polysaccharides that help with help our body and helping with like our brain health, our heart health, gut health, and overall immunity as well. So our functional mushrooms have more of those properties within them. And then there are some medicinal ones that have more of like nootropic properties to it, like lion's mane, where you're getting neurogenesis in the brain, where the nerve endings are connecting back together, and you're getting natural energy and stimulation without the use of like a stimulant. Yes, and so whereas like culinary ones are just really good and healthy for your body, and they taste good.
Why have mushrooms evolved to have these abilities or these traits that we can benefit from? And where does the research come on mushrooms? Like, I just didn't grow up with mushrooms on my radar at all in terms of like something that we would take as a vitamin or as a supplement. And they weren't often that regular in our diet. Mom cooked everything at home, but there weren't a whole lot of mushrooms going around. And if they were, there was just kind of a afterthought thing.
Something
maybe
in your pasta.
Pasta, pizza, or maybe an omelet or something.
Right.
But, what's different, like biologically, about these organisms? I don't know the science behind it myself, but aren't mushrooms closer to being human beings than a lot of plants?
I was just about to say, they're very ancient beings. And that's what I like to call them. They're beings. They're very alien. They're not of this earth. I fully believe that they came from somewhere else and crashed into the earth and just really allowed life to thrive. But they say, and I could be having this statistic not fully correct, but they say it's about 60, our body is about 62% alike. Mushrooms, down to like the DNA, which is crazy to me. Like that if you look at the genealogy of mushrooms, how like everything breaks off from there. in like mammals or like, any other type of animal and stuff. It's just, it's crazy how alike we are. And so when we ingest mushrooms, our body recognizes it. And that's why we are responding so well medicinally to mushrooms, because our bodies are recognizing it. And that includes psychedelics as well. I'm sure you've seen fantastic fungi and stuff, and how like the mycelium network and how it's like the interweb underneath of the ground, and how they're allowing trees to talk to each other, and like the
facilitating life.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so when we ingest them, we can talk about psychedelic or psilocybin. Our brain recognizes it, and that's where we're getting the connectivity back and that electromagnetic charge within our brain. As far as like medicinal ones, again, our bodies are 62% alike, so our bodies are recognizing, almost like, have you heard of bioidentical hormones? So bioidentical hormones are like synthetic hormones that have been created in a lab, but they look and feel to your body like hormones. So it's bioidentical. So your body recognizes it. So you're able to utilize the hormones more versus just taking like a true synthetic hormone pill, where your body may not recognize the attributes of it, right? It's very similar to that. So if you're taking and ingesting something that your body is more alike, the more available your body is to absorb all of those medicinal properties.
There's a point in the body where, and I'm far from being knowledgeable on the topic, but there's a point where, like if you take too much multivitamin or too much fish oil or too much whatever, there's a certain threshold where it's functional. There's an optimal point, and then beyond that, you urinate it out.
For sure, yeah.
Right? Like
or
there's a carrying capacity.
Or your body, like vitamin D, is not water soluble, so your body actually holds on to it in the fat cells. So it's good to be on vitamin D, but then take a break, so that way your body can, the macrophages can slowly eat out the vitamin D, right? Because you don't want to have vitamin D toxicity or overload in your body. So yeah, there are vitamins that like B12 or vitamin C, you just like urinate it out. And then there are some vitamins that, you need to stay off of it for a little bit, because, a little bit, or I should say too much of something, right, is not necessarily a good thing. Everything's best in moderation. But yeah, so there's certain vitamins where your body will just release it or store it. But mushrooms, your body just releases it, right? Or it utilizes it in your body.
When I see something like on the website or in literature I've read about functional mushrooms where turkey tail, for example, has anti-cancer agents, I would think, okay, then if you have the cancer diagnosis or you're dealing with it, then just drink gallons of turkey tail extract all day long until everything's flushed out. But the body just doesn't work that way.
Right, exactly. Are you familiar with homeopathic medicine?
I think that's a beautiful idea. My understanding of homeopathic medicine is when you take a teeny tiny little fraction of a capsule, which has been
diluted.
Like the essence of something has entered that little sugar pill and then nanoparticles.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, and so and that's why I love microdosing so much with anything like vitamins, mushrooms, everything. I think your body recognizes it way more versus like this. Imagine like taking a couch, shoving a couch through a tiny little door, right? Your body's not going to be able to do that. You're going to chop it up into little pieces first, and then you're going to bring it through the door, and then your body's going to utilize it. And so with the homeopathic medicine, it's been diluted so much, these particles, that your body is able to actually utilize it down to the cellular level and pass through like the blood-brain barrier as well, versus, there's certain products in our body that just sitting there and then you just pee it out. So to go back to your point about like drinking so much turkey tail, I think that there's an opportunity for the medicinal world or even like pharmaceuticals to really like lean in on nanoparticles with like homeopathic medicine for our bodies to utilize these medicines more.
Are you a sober person?
I am, yes.
And how long has that been the case for you?
So it's a great question. So back when I was 24, yeah, when I was 24, I became fully sober for 4 years. I went through a breakup right around 28. And I got back into like society and, hanging out with old friends again and kind of like getting myself back into drinking. I wouldn't say it was more of like a coping mechanism. It was more of like I wanted to feel a part of something again because I've been so isolated for so long in that relationship. And so I did drink alcohol for a number of years. It was never like, I don't even like drinking. Personally don't like the feeling of it. But it was more of like a social thing for me. And then, I would say recently again, I just became fully sober again. I love it. I love the feeling of being so aware of everything. Because again, we came onto this earth to feel. I don't want to take something and for it to numb what God has given me, the blessings of feeling, hurting, the pain, the ecstasy as well that you are feeling every single day. And that's why I love psychedelics, specifically plant medicines, is because it enhances those feelings. You feel more during that. You're not numb, right? I've only done psilocybin. I've done MDMA
As a microdose,
as a microdose. I've only done 2 macro doses in my life, and I feel like those have been really wonderful and beautiful, but I've never delved into the world of the other psychedelics, and I just don't feel the need to because my own personal psychedelic, it's, what does psychedelic mean? It's an enhancement of the mind, right? It's something that alters your consciousness. And so you can do that within like a sober lifestyle and not have to ingest something to feel, right?
Yeah, I think sometimes the term that gets used is California sober, which I think is kind of fun. But I think when someone says that, they're referring to I don't use alcohol, but maybe I smoke cannabis,
Right.
or I take cannabis or whatever, and potentially psychedelics is thrown into that as well.
Yeah.
At the time of this taping, it's the day before Halloween 2023, and Halloween's 10 years sobriety for me.
Congrats.
Thanks. I didn't ever go through a program or anything like that. I just had enough of the realization that I was unable to use alcohol in a way that was not destructive for my own well-being, happiness, physiological, spiritual, emotional, intellectual life.
Yeah.
It's funny to carry that awareness for a decade now. I could leave this podcast taping and go drink a beer immediately, and the whole thing would be done. The streak would be over, So sort of keeping that streak is sort of a tantalizing prospect every day.
Yeah.
I think for somebody like me, like I was diagnosed early in my life with depression and anxiety. Another topic that I like to get into, just like, what does that mean for people? What does the addictive capacity of people mean for people? I tend to think that a lot of the reason why we suffer with mood disorder or addiction or depression or anxiety, whatever you want to call it, is because we haven't prioritized creating containers and structures for the expression of who we are, the challenges that we face, opportunities to be vulnerable and candid with one another. I went to a workshop this past weekend, from Department of Consciousness, Mike Goldfarb and Jody Green, and they were on the podcast last week, and it was a workshop for having a psychedelic experience without taking a psychedelic. It was called Be the Drug, and we did a lot of eye gazing with strangers, and that. And for those who haven't done it, it's a trip, right? Like if you go through that kind of exercise of just having an experience outside of the ordinary with another person. There's a lot that's possible there.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that, we're pretty complex, pretty mystical entities. you know. And there's a lot to uncover just by sort of fucking around in that way. Eye gazing with a stranger, holding someone's attention for 5 minutes and like really feeling them. There's so much going on. I think the analog for that was if you were to have a microdose or a macrodose and you feel yourself opening, or you feel that vulnerability, or you feel a sense of yourself that incorporates a different kind of awareness. That's what they were getting at with this exercise, right? So I'm always drawn to the dialogue around the psychedelic world because of how effective I think it can be in breaking down the kind of norms that are keeping us miserable and unhealthy and misunderstood. The mushrooms that you're working with Mushee, chaga, lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi, and turkey tail.
Yes. The 5 cores.
There's 5. And how are those the focal point for the company right now?
Yeah. So those are the most popular mushrooms, right? Medicinal mushrooms right now. And those are the buzzwords, right? And so those are the ones that I picked because I know that's what's going to grab people's attention. Like, oh, I know lion's mane, I know chaga, turkey tail, and cordyceps. People are still kind of like on like the line, like, oh, what is this? I know what this is. I don't know what this is. And then reishi's kind of in that middle ground. And so those are the reasons why we picked those ones. Is those are the most popular ones right now. There are plenty of other medicinal mushrooms out there. I mean, what do they say? There's like over 2 million mushrooms out there that we haven't even found yet. Like imagine there's mushrooms out there that you can sprinkle into the ground and it eats plastic, right? And there's mushrooms that you can, fantastic fungi that eat up oil, right? So there's so many different types of mushrooms out there, but the medicinal ones, I really wanted to focus on just 5 mushrooms that I knew that were popular, right? But I love what you said, going back to like with psychedelics and kind of like anxiety and depression and everything. And I always ask the question, why do we have these? I want to call them energies. Because anxiety and depression isn't really like a sickness or a disease. It's a dis-ease, right? And so it's this pent-up energy that is in our body that we haven't utilized yet. And also coming down to how were you raised as an infant by your mother and your father? And a lot of times people who like get addicted or have anxiety, depression and stuff, I like to look at like how were they birthed? Were they breastfed? Did they have skin to skin contact after they were born with the mother? When you were crying as a baby, were you left to kind of like solve your own issues as a baby? Or did mom and dad come and like, nurture you and nourish you and make you feel safe? And, was it your choice to stop breastfeeding? You're on your mom, right? And we shame mothers nowadays for openly breastfeeding. We're getting better at it. Or like shaming moms who their child is 3 or 4 and still slightly breastfeeding. It's most kids when they breastfeed, it's like nurturing, right? It's like your blanket or your passy. It's something that's tangible that comforts you. And so, if as children, if you're taken away from that at a young age and you're left to your own device of like self-soothing yourself, that does transfer over as an adult. How are you going to self-soothe yourself when you're feeling these feelings? And so something to grab and latch onto, if we want to get really deep into like, with like heroin users, what do they first say when they first take heroin? It's feels like a warm hug from their mother. And so that feeling of their mom really goes deep, deep rooted down there. And so if we look at anxiety and depression, it is that angst, right? Where you don't know what to do. Because I've definitely have suffered with anxiety, and I don't like to say I had depression. I still like struggle with that, of like admitting that, because I'm like, oh, I've been a vegan for 10 years. I used to do competitive bodybuilding. Like I used to, I've always been like super healthy and conscious and aware. And I'm like, I didn't have that. I was spiritual bypassing myself. And so, it was just this way of nurturing myself, right? When I was younger, by like keeping myself busy. When you have anxiety, you keep yourself busy, right? And when you're depressed, you go into this like deep, deep hole of like not wanting to do anything, right? Because it's easier to just put your head in the ground and not deal with your problems head on. And so I just think that with any of those energies that our bodies deal with, we have to go back and again look at how were we raised.
Yeah, I think I could talk about it a lot. I feel like, for me at the time, it's easy to go into a medical system, a office, and then be diagnosed and prescribed. And it's the allopathic model, the Western model. At the time, I was okay with thinking they're telling me that there's something that's not functioning correctly, just like if you had a heart murmur or some kind of thyroid condition or, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist.
Yeah.
The doctors and scientists are telling me that there's something wrong with the way that I create serotonin or work with serotonin, or there's an imbalance, right? That's what we have decided it is, and it's causing this, right? But I feel like everybody could use a guardian angel, or a really strong friend that's impervious to your bullshit, who can say, hey, let's like get to the bottom of this. Some kind of guide, some kind of like spiritual guide.
Absolutely.
A wisdom source that can, really say, hey, maybe it is pent up energy. Maybe it's not been expressed this way. Maybe you don't have the language yet, the perspective yet to exorcise these feelings through
getting chills,
whatever, whatever the practice is that you choose to get into later in life, or the habits that you embrace later in life, or the communities that you find later in life. And addiction, for Pete's sake, I mean, if you've been close to people like you have and who are dealing with active addiction, especially to alcohol or opioids, when you learn about their stories, it's a series of life occurrences, often that are kind of staggering to think about. If you haven't been there yourself, to see somebody else what they're subjected to, and think, of course, this is what's happened.
right?
Right. Part of your mission with what you're doing with the company is putting knowledge and tools out there for people to explore.
Yeah.
It's not about eradicating negative feelings. It's just saying we have options that can create a more balanced experience of life. And I want to, before I forget, I want to ask you about, unless there's anything else you want to add to the depression and anxiety. You know, I mean, I think that
We could talk. I could talk up for hours as well.
I think we find terms for
Yeah.
things so that we can prescribe
Right.
for them.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
and I mean, it just a person's sort of left to their own devices to research or meet people or find community or be introduced to things that, you know, I think a lot of it is identifying what you love, the space you like to abide in, and somehow navigating our world to as much of that as possible.
Right.
You know,
And then with utilizing like, you know, products like mine or any other else's products, you know, that you feel good energetically with, you know, those are body expanders or mind expanders, right? And so to get you to where to navigate, you know, through your life, right? And so I love utilizing lion's mane to really just like help expand my mind in a sober way. Or cordyceps expand my body in a sober way to like get more out of like my day, right? And so I think that's like a really beautiful aspect of supplements and the adaptogenic world, as well as you know, what feels best in our body that we can feel that warm hug from our mom without utilizing substances that decay us.
you at some point in time you decided to try a microdose of psilocybin.
Yeah.
That was your first psychedelic experience.
I would say that was my second psychedelic experience, but my first microdose experience. My first psychedelic experience was 4 years prior to that. I was 24, and my ex at the time, we did like 1.5, 2 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. I don't know what they were. They were just dry. We put them on toast, peanut butter, and ate it.
And what was the purpose of that moment? What were you?
There was no intention other than just to try these mushrooms and to watch trippy television at the time. I had no idea what I was doing. Clearly, the person that I was with didn't have any guidance himself. But it was really interesting that trip. I feel like most people, they kind of have this like outer body experience, right? It's like cosmos and all of this, where I went within and I was my soul in this shell of my body. And I realized like at the time, I always knew I had a spirit and a soul, you know, growing up Christian and everything. But I never really felt the extent of that. And this inner body experience really freaked me out. I was in my body realizing that, oh my gosh, I'm trapped in this body for 80, 100, 150 years. And I'm literally in my body, like banging on it. And I'm like feeling claustrophobic. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what is happening? I'm like, how did I get in here? It was crazy. It was a wild experience. And then I started calming myself down. I was like, let me go to the bathroom. Bad idea. Then you look at yourself in the mirror and you just see your skeleton. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go lie down now again. Laying down in my bed. And a really beautiful moment happened where I was just like not in my body, just kind of like me, Cristianna again. This version of my soul. And just looking at the light dripping into my bedroom and just how the light dripping down into like these like crystals and seeing light in like a new and peculiar way that I've never seen before. That was probably the most beautiful moment. It wasn't, the whole trip wasn't long lasting. It was like an hour and a half at most. But the next day I woke up and I was like, wow, I won't do that again. And then fast forward 4 years later, my first microdose experience, I was having really, really bad anxiety. Again, I was depressed, didn't want to admit it, but really bad anxiety. Debilitating, where I would have to take a nebulizer and turn on the machine and just put it up to my mouth just because that was like the only thing that really like helped me. cope through that and really open up my airways, because I felt like I really couldn't breathe. So at the time, my ex, I was with that person for about 6 years. He was like, I've been researching and I feel like you need this. And he told me what it was. And I was like, there's no way I'm doing that again. I was like, I don't want to have this inner body experience. And he goes, no, it's like literally like, remember what we took? He's like, it's a fraction of that. It's just like a vitamin. Take it. So we took it on my birthday and it was the best day ever. Like I was cognizant. I was in my body. I was feeling more enhanced version of myself and laughing and feeling like super happy. And at the time I totally forgot I had taken the microdose. And then I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot. Why am I so happy? Oh, I took this like little thing. That's crazy. And I remember laying on the hammock with my ex, and we had a pretty rough relationship, but it was like one of the most best days I had with him in a really long time. And then I remember turning over and looking at him and just thinking to myself, wow, you are not my person. After a really beautiful day, and really like accepting that. And then in that moment, like praying to source, God, universe, that to give me a sign if this person is meant for me. And it's funny, if you ask, you shall receive, right? And so shortly after that, this series of events, and we just ended up breaking up shortly after that. But after that, it just like really changed my life. And I was not confident. I would beat on myself all the time of like who I was as a person, and really hard on myself, and really kind of a pushover. No one with, I didn't have a spine. I just allowed people to continue to beat me down because I felt like that's what I deserved from a really young age. Just like a lot of like childhood trauma. And then I started going on a microdose protocol by myself. No one taught me anything. I never researched anything. I just like, again, this is the powerful part when you are really close with God, our source, our universe, and you're really in tune with your body and your surroundings, how like you're able just to like remember and know exactly what you're supposed to do. So again, I was like tapping into the collective, and the collective and the mushrooms were telling me exactly what I should be doing with this protocol. And so for a few months, I did this protocol where every day after work, I would go into like this like yoga ritual, and then I would journal and I would sit there and meditate. And basically every day I'd be crying and releasing all of this energy that I had pent up and stored in my body, and the mushrooms were allowing it to just be fully released. And this is on microdosing. Like I was having, these like really aha epiphanies, basically almost every day, receiving so many downloads. And I remember at one point before, this is like years before that, I would pray to God and cry, like, I just want to know the truth. I want to know everything. Like, I'm sick and tired of not knowing and not being fully aware, but I obviously wasn't ready for it at the time. And then after the protocol, I just like, wow, I am this goddess, and these people that I have allowed to enter into my life really saw my light and wanted to bring me down. And they were, had darker entities within them that wanted to like, tear somebody down that has a light and has a purpose in this world, right? And so I realized that was like, wow, every woman should feel like this. And every man should feel the power within themselves, like who they are and their king energy. And I'm in my queen energy. Like this is beautiful, because when you're in that archetype, you're not like wanting to take power over other people. You want to harness that power and help lift other people up, right? So it was just like a really beautiful experience. And then shortly after that, I started really researching more psychedelics and then functional mushrooms and getting into that, and just like this whole spiral up of consciousness. And then after a year of microdosing, I wasn't doing it every day for a full year. I would go like on and off. But after a year, my last microdose, the mushrooms were like, okay, you're done. You're okay for a bit. And I was like, okay. And I just went on my way and just continued to meditate, and journal. Journaling was like a really big part of like my healing. Physically seeing my thoughts really was super healing. But then just going throughout my day and, then building the psychedelic company because I wanted to share this gift with everybody. I'm like, everybody needs to know about this, but not on a macrodose level, but on a microdose level, because macrodosing can seem scary. I'm still scared of it, even though I've done macrodosing, it's a lot. It's very, I don't want to say draining, but it definitely takes a lot of your life force out of you, where you do have to kind of like sit and integrate and kind of like recollect your energy back together. And so microdosing is just a powerful way for even the most scared person to take it and have this like little tiny spark of like, whoa, what was that? Did I just see a partial glimpse of my real, true, like most authentic self? Let me try that again, and then making your way up to the macrodose. Because I do think macrodosing is very beneficial. I just don't particularly like the method that we're doing now, with like the ketamine protocol, where it's like getting like super like dissociated and like this like intravenous IV, where you're like really like diving deep in like that. That's great for some people. They may be ready for that, but most people are still petrified of psychedelics. And so I think microdosing offers a way for people to really like dip their toe in the water and then eventually get to that point. Because it took me 2.5 years until I did my first macro dose of 3.5 mushrooms, grams of mushrooms. And if you look at, I don't know if you've ever read the book, The Immortality Key. You have by Brian Morosco. It's amazing. I would definitely read it. But he talks about ancient civilizations like ancient Greece and ancient Turkey, and how they had this like secret society, and it ties back to like Christianity. It's wild. But basically they had this like secret society where they utilized an alcoholic elixir, a fermented berry that had a slight amount of alcohol in it. Again, nothing like we had today. And they would mix it with ergot, which is, you know what ergot is? Yeah. They would mix it with ergot, the mushroom, and they would utilize it in ceremonies. And the crazy part is that it was basically called like the Holy Spirit, partaking in the Holy Spirit. It's crazy. And so in order to even be allowed into the secret society or the club, you had to do X amount of years of work before you're even able to just be a part of it, not even partake in it, just to actually like be a part of it and witness other people taking it. So I think microdosing for me is kind of like that same protocol. Like you're doing the work, before you actually go in and do the macrodose, because then you're ready for it, right? You've done the work. And now you kind of just doing this last little leg. And again, healing is infinite, right? We can always heal our bodies. But I think that's such a beautiful way of allowing people to take it slow. We don't need to dive right in. You can take it slow. It's a journey. Enjoy life. Enjoy the process. Enjoy the pain. Enjoy the happiness, the ecstasy that comes with life. Because again, we came here to feel.
Can you speak to some of what is on the horizon for you as an entrepreneur, as a business owner? What's happening in addition to Mushee?
Yeah. Yeah. So, so in addition to Mushee, I'm building a botanical biopharmaceutical company. So if you look at all of the psychedelic companies right now, everything is synthetic. It's an extraction and isolated extraction that has been put into like a organic compound. So that's why we have like psilocin, or even we have like synthetic versions of mescaline, synthetic versions of LSD, or ergot, synthetic versions of ergot. And so I'm taking this holistic route of I think that's wonderful, and I think that's a great way for people to partake in a consistent psychedelic. Like you know exactly what you're getting every single time, right? But you lose the essence. You lose the power, the life force of that plant, right? When you robotize it, so that's the best way of describing it, into just this thing versus something that harnesses life and sacred geometry within that, its own frequency. It's way different than taking the synthetic version. And I'm not knocking that. I think it's a wonderful avenue for people. But what I'm creating is a botanical drugs. And we're starting off with our psilocybin strain that won the psilocybin cup for best for microdosing. So we're going to start off with that. But then I would love to open up the field for more plant medicines to be prescribed. Because if you look at supplements today, there's no regulation behind it. And that's good for people who really want to start a company, right? And they don't have to like jump through all these hoops in order just to like bring forth a product. Like, a mom and pop, right? I think that's wonderful to open up the playing field for everybody to be able to partake in that. But there is also this gap in medicine today where, especially in America, and we're even seeing it in Europe as well, utilizing Western medicine as the end all be all. And we've totally have forgotten us and like where we've come from in nature. And also realizing that all pharmacology has come from plants. In the book, The Immortality Key, Brian, he talks about this book. It is the Pharmacia de Medica. It's the medical book of pharmacology. And in that, it's literally just all plants and their medicinal properties. There's so much out there that we can do to actually clinically prove that plant medicines actually really work. And so that's kind of like my mission and my drive with building this company is actually once and for all proving that plant medicines work in a clinical setting and then being able to prescribe it. I mean, how powerful would that be to go to your general practitioner and say, hey, like I have white willow bark for you, instead of you taking baby aspirin every day, to thin your blood or to help with like pain. I'm going to prescribe this clinically proven white willow bark to you, and you go to the pharmacy and you pick it up. Why are we not doing that? And the reasons why is because there's not a lot of money in it. You can't patent it, right? You can't patent something that comes from the ground. So I have a duty and a calling in this life to see out that plant medicines actually get the recognition that they deserve in a clinical setting.
It sounds like it's a big task,
Yeah.
and it's going to be quite a journey.
Yes.
For now, people who want to learn more about what you do and the products that you offer currently, musheemedicinal.com.
Yeah, musheemedicinal.com, or you can follow Mushee at Mushee Medicinal on Instagram and on TikTok.
Appreciate you taking the time to share with me today and our audience.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.